Hey, what's going on, everybody? I have Matt Belinson here, covers Louisiana Tech as a sports editor for the Ruston Leader. We're here to talk about new Miami Hurricanes defensive tackle David Blay, coming off a big year, All Conference USA first team selection. Matt, what'd you make of David's season? The stats are impressive for a defensive tackle: 46 tackles, 10 and a half for loss, 6.5 sacks. What'd you make of this year for David?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's something that Louisiana Tech desperately needed. If you look at the past couple of years of Louisiana Tech's, frankly, lack of success, there's certainly many things that you can point to as to why that is. But I think if you were going to point to maybe one of the top two reasons, they have not had someone that's been able to impact the passer. You look at the past couple of years going back to 2022, this team's sack leader was not over 4 sacks. So they just lacked a presence on the defensive line, someone that could disrupt opposing offenses. And, they challenged David as kind of someone in that middle, kind of over the center in this 3-3-5 defense that Jeremiah Johnson, brought in from Northern Iowa. They wanted him to kind of be that wrecker in the middle of this defensive line, to kind of go with some nice defensive end pieces. And so he certainly proved that this year, like you mentioned, career highs in a bunch of different categories. I think he definitely was playing his best football at the latter half of this season, which I think definitely, increased his recruiting profile. When you talk about the games he had against Arkansas, Western Kentucky, UTEP, Jacksonville State, the list goes on. I think that definitely opened some eyes of, hey, it's one thing that this guy's dominating, maybe some FCS opponents early in the season, but he was doing it against, Division One, SEC caliber, players towards the latter half as well. So I think overall for David, a really impressive season, something he obviously worked a lot towards. And, obviously, like you mentioned, he's heading off to Miami now to see if he can keep it going.
Yeah, and with keeping it going, the biggest question with him is, can David Blay make an impact at the next level? And he's been doing that, right? With his journey from where he was at before, a D2 school, and then, the journey he's been on, progress as a player. Matt, there was something that you said that stood out to me, and again with the stats, the 6.5 sacks for a guy of his size playing interior line there, and that scheme that they had with Jeremiah Johnson, as you mentioned with breaking down his game on his pass rushing ability, because that's not, again, with the position he plays, that's not always, the biggest thing for a defensive tackle to do that. What'd you notice with that? And essentially where he came from a year ago, kind of just being a reserve kind of guy, a key guy there, but to where he was this season, in particular with his pass rushing abilities.
Yeah, I think before we even get to his ability, I think before the season started, they challenged, both the offensive and defensive lines of this team to really bulk up in size. And that was something that Sonny Cumbie mentioned, in the offseason. He felt like on both the offensive and defensive line, they lacked enough girth to really create enough, momentum on either side of the football. And so when you looked at the, just kind of his in-between offseason, with their head trainer, David Scholes, he gained 23 pounds. And so I think, again, when you're talking about a defensive tackle, if you want to push people back, use your arms, use your length, use your size, you're going to need some weight to carry with you. And like I mentioned, he got over the 300-pound mark in the offseason, did a really good job keeping that, pretty lean mass, again, for a defensive tackle, was able to move pretty quickly. I keep going back to that Arkansas game because I'm sure whenever you talk to some Miami coaches, towards the beginning of next season, I wonder how much that game impacted their view of him, because you look at the pass rush ability that he had in that first quarter where, frankly, Louisiana Tech's defense allowed Tech to kind of stay in the game longer than I thought. Arkansas didn't score till late in the second quarter. David had a really nice sack, in the first quarter there, really blew up the center, kind of with a bull rush move. And then you kind of watch as the game went on. Arkansas's offensive line, must have said, we're not going to let this guy just kind of bully us up the middle anymore. And so they definitely double teamed and chipped him a little bit more. I think he uses great, hand movement, kind of hand swipes and stuff like that. Again, he definitely bulked up a little bit, that I think you saw a little bit more of a bull rush at times, but I think he's definitely kind of a more a technician. I don't think he, at times is going to use just his full on weight to try and overwhelm somebody, especially going into the ACC. I would imagine that he's probably not going to have too many matchups where he can just one-on-one, just kind of, move someone backward. And so I think for him, it's all going to be about matchups. It's all going to be about using his hands, properly, getting good, just movement off the ball. And, I think for him, again, I think it's really encouraging if you're a Miami fan to see he's playing his best football towards the end of the season against better competition. I think it would have been one thing if, hey, I rack up 4, sacks against Nichols. I rack up, 3 sacks against Tulsa. And that's kind of where the bulk of my production was. And no, he's doing it against, some of the better competition in this league and in the country when, teams have a better scouting report on you. And so I think if you're David, I think it's just about, going into the ACC and recognizing that you're probably gonna have to bulk up a little bit more physically. But I do think he definitely has the raw tools to have an impact for sure.
Matt, let's stay on that Arkansas game. I mean, you mentioned it. I certainly wanted to bring it up. He had 5 tackles, 2 for a loss, and a sack. And I know how Miami judges players when they're looking at identifying guys in the transfer portal. They look at games like this, and they like to watch full games. And I know, just again with their research process of identifying players, that is certainly something that they would go through. There's no doubt about that. And I know you touched on it with the Arkansas game, and maybe it was leading up to it, as you mentioned, maybe the Jack State game, the Western Kentucky game, kind of leading up to it, kind of, as you mentioned, kind of feeling like he's playing better in the second half. What do you remember, if you could touch more on that game and also the importance of that for a player like David, really, as you mentioned, racking up tackles against teams in his conference, and that's one thing, but to have some sort of impact in a game like that. And certainly the score got out of hand, but an individual standpoint, how important do you think that is? And maybe were there other things that stood out to you about that game? And then how much you think that can help a player like him? Again, going back to the question, can he make an impact at the next level? Because you're going to face teams like that on a more routine basis in the ACC level.
Yeah, I mean, I keep going back to, again, if you watch the full Arkansas game, again, like you mentioned, they gave up a lot of points defensively as a team. But I think if you watch David individually, you immediately notice after the first quarter that Arkansas made a concerted effort to make sure that he doesn't get one-on-one matchups. And again, I think if you're a Miami coach, I think that definitely would have stood out of like, okay, Arkansas has faced so many, NFL caliber pass rushers that are going to go on and play on Sundays. And again, David's obviously got a long way to go before he's there, but I definitely think it's worth noting that an SEC program, made it a point of emphasis of saying we're not going to allow this defensive tackle for Louisiana Tech to beat our guys one-on-one. I think that matters in terms of again, football is all about matchups. It's all about, can our one guy beat your one guy? And if they can't, can we do everything possible to make sure that doesn't happen? And I think David, again, he's going to finish with the 1 sack, against Arkansas. So it's not a monster game by any means, but again, when you talk about just the competition level that Louisiana Tech has faced in the past, they haven't had a ton of opportunities like this to be on a stage like that. They've played NC State, they played Clemson, they played Missouri in the past here and there, but again, I think if in this era of transfer portal and NIL, when guys are free to move and coaches are constantly scouting, I think it was really valuable for David in this defense that frankly kind of flew under the radar this year. They've again, I know there's still some teams obviously playing for the national title, but they're going to finish as a top 15 total defense this year. And I really don't think they got a ton of national credit for that. And I think certainly David's play is part of that. They were able to stop the run a whole lot better. Arkansas, again, Taylor Green, to his credit at quarterback, did a nice job on some, designed runs and things like that. But, for the most part, Arkansas didn't really run the ball, that effectively against Louisiana Tech. And I think overall, David's, success this year, not only in terms of rushing the passer, but stopping the run as well, is just a big body and an immovable object up front for Louisiana Tech, and especially in that Arkansas game and throughout, the latter half of the season, I think really played a huge part in why this defense as a whole played so well. Because again, like I mentioned, they just lacked a presence up front. That I think now that they had it this past year, I think they recognized the body type, the physical makeup that they want to try and replace. Obviously, now that David's gone, and so again, I think it was a huge stage for him against Arkansas. He made the most of it, and I think now if you're this Miami coaching staff, it's about getting that production, for 10, 11, 12 games, throughout a course of a whole season.
Yeah, and Louisiana Tech led Conference USA in run defense, total defense, second in scoring defense. So certainly a good defense, as you mentioned, top 15 there nationally with what they were doing with Jeremiah Johnson. You touched on Jeremiah, Coach Johnson there, the scheme that he ran. And maybe points of emphasis for a guy like David, to play in that defense. Miami has not, they typically go with the 4-man front. Obviously, they're going to have a new coordinator for defense, so we'll see how that transpires with the scheme and how it kind of fits in with David here and his role and how they see him fit. But how did he fit in that defense? And again, points of emphasis for, to play for Jeremiah, Coach Johnson, and what he's bringing to the team, and to have a good defense. And I always, it doesn't matter the level that you're playing at. You want to be in a successful program, whether it's your side of the ball, wins and losses, and whatever it might be. You want to be with a successful unit and team. Again, it doesn't matter the level. Again, Coach Johnson, can provide some insight on him and his defense here?
Yeah, again, if someone wasn't watching Louisiana Tech the past couple of years, I don't really think I can describe how poor they were defensively before Jeremiah Johnson got here. They finished 2023 as a bottom three in the entire country in terms of stopping the run. They ranked bottom five in terms of sack production. I mean, they passing defense, they were bottom 15 in the country. I mean, they needed a change. And Jeremiah in year one immediately flipped things around. I think the word that just keeps coming to mind, and there's so many things that he changed about this defense, but I think the one thing that comes to mind when I think about just the defense that he installed is the multiplicity. There's so many guys in this defense that, yes, they're listed at a certain position, but when you look at where they were aligned on the field on a given Saturday, like there were so many guys that were lined up in different spots that they would show a look and then they would jump out of it, or they would not show something and then jump right into it. And I think, again, like you mentioned, it's not going to be a perfect one for one in terms of defensive scheme. But I think David is used to being rotated in and out, of a defensive line unit. Jeremiah, whether it be defensive line or linebackers, they got a lot of guys in there. Some guys were specifically on third down. Some guys were every down guys. And I think this defense did a really good job of putting guys in different positions on a particular play. And then saying, you know what, we're going to hold you back for maybe 4 or 5 plays, and then we're going to throw you back in there. And so again, I think David did a really good job of kind of embracing that. Again, he was kind of traditionally still, that over the center type of guy. But they did, move him at times into more of a shade role at times given certain matchups. But again, I think just his physical makeup and I think kind of what Miami's looking for. I would be surprised if he doesn't, end up over the center again in kind of that traditional tackle spot. But again, I think if you look at this defense overall for Louisiana Tech, they asked their guys to do a lot of different things. I think Jeremiah recognized that there were definitely some intriguing pass rush pieces here. When we talk about David Blay, Jaden Burnett, Jaden Gray, Michael Clark, there were a lot of guys, at Louisiana Tech that when you looked at their underlying statistics and kind of their raw potential and where they started from, you're thinking like, how did a defense not get more out of these guys? And I think that was something that Jeremiah recognized was if we just let them play free, we let them play, with an attacking mindset, we're going to let them go after the quarterback. We're not going to ask them to be as tentative. I think you saw David and this defense as a whole really embrace that. And I think, again, if you're Miami, you're going to be facing a lot of really good run teams in the ACC, a lot of teams that have some veteran quarterbacks in the ACC. And I think if you're David, I think he's going to come in with a lot of experience of just knowing like how to attack opposing offenses, with that mindset of just letting the defense dictate things rather than just, some of those defenses where, hey, we'll let you kind of take what you want and then we'll just stop you when it's crucial time. I think that was not what Louisiana Tech wanted to do. They want to put teams behind the sticks. And David was a huge part of that. They would send extra pressure at times, either from the linebacking core, from the defensive secondary, or they would do a lot of stunting action, with David at times too. He maybe start at center, over the center, and then he would find his way, wrapping around against a tackle. And so again, I think if you're Louisiana Tech, I think they really put David and this defensive line in a lot of positions this year where, again, they would present one thing and then they would end up in another. And I think that, again, the multiplicity and the versatility, again, David's not just a typical, hey, I'm just this big mass, just throw me out there. I'll just do my thing. Like he's a guy that you can put in different situations. And I'm really curious to see what Miami does with him.
Yeah, Matt, again, I just keep thinking about it. It goes back to the question again that I'm going to mention this again, but can he make an impact at the next level? And he's since essentially has answered that question as yes, he can every step of the way of his career. When you look back at where he came from, again, from Levittown, PA, and then going to West Chester Division II program, redshirting, playing there his second year. And then, as I mentioned, Louisiana Tech, 2 years there. He's got 1 year left at Miami, but going from the role that he was at the year before and then coming into a starter as an all-conference caliber player. What do you think has led to him continuing to answer that question that, yes, he can make an impact at the next level? That you don't see this journey happen all the time. And he's answered that question. What's led to that again? I know you touched on his size and kind of improved there. He's listed at 6'4", 303. Haven't mentioned that, but again, 1 year left. What do you think it is about his mindset and his approach to each step that he's made here and how he's gotten to this point in his career?
Yeah, it's going to sound cliche, but I think it's really the story of just someone being underrated, and I think wanting to prove people wrong. Again, like you mentioned, you start your college career at the D2 level. He was a pretty productive high school player, but just didn't really find a home at the D1 level and had to start off kind of working his way up and having to grind. And again, I know it's going to sound cliche, but that's kind of the mantra of a lot of Louisiana Tech's, starting unit. You look across the board, there's not really a ton of guys, I guess maybe with the exception of Colby Fields, who started his career in the SEC at linebacker. Like, there really aren't a ton of guys when you look at this team overall. They're like, oh man, Louisiana Tech plucked this, 4-star prospect out of the high school ranks or out of the portal. Like, it's a lot of journeymen. It's a lot of guys that have kind of had to work their way up to this level. And again, I think if you're David, it's just a matter of proving people wrong and proving, again, like your questions asked, can he play at this XYZ level? And again, coming from the D2 ranks, to the Division I level, playing against some really good Conference USA opponents, playing against some Big Ten, SEC opponents over the last couple of years, he's proven that he can hang. Now, again, it's going to be a matter of, can he do that for a full season against that level of competition? Obviously, again, Louisiana Tech has played those teams in spurts. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see if he can do that for a whole sustained season. But again, I think if you ask David, I think if you ask the defensive coaching staff, there was just a lack of belief, just with this defensive unit of what they have produced over the last couple of years. Again, it's hard to say that you're a good player. It's hard for people to believe that you're a good player when, again, the team results are not what they, want to be. And again, I think it was just all about mentality with Jeremiah. He wanted to show these guys, like, we're going to put you in this position. And if you just do what we ask, like, you can be a productive player. You can be a good player that can have opportunities. And so again, I think it's just David, recognizing that, hey, this is my opportunity. I got to take advantage of it. A new coach trusts me, and he certainly made the most of it. And so I think, again, as he goes to Miami, I think it's just going to be a matter of, can this coaching staff continue to motivate him and say, okay, hey, now there are people doubting you that you can't make the jump from Conference USA to the ACC level, and I'm sure there's going to be people that doubt, hey, can you turn into an NFL prospect? And so again, I think it would be really cool, start your career at the Division II level, and then you end your career at the ACC level, making an impact. And so again, I think it's just all about him embracing the doubters. And I think, again, he's proven time and time again that whether it be physically, mentally, or just belief in the team itself, he certainly answered the call multiple times. So I definitely would not doubt him this time.
Yeah, and the Miami staff, they definitely need defensive tackles, with what they lost, what they're bringing back, and kind of getting a guy like David. They certainly are looking for him to do well. A point of emphasis, we always talk about the offensive line, the defensive line with Coach Cristobal, obviously they want that to be a strength of their team. And defense all around from last year, from Miami's standpoint. I know the secondary was their weakest point, but the defensive line has to get better too. And the addition of David Blay certainly seems like they're on the right track of getting more production and more positive play, whether it's pass rush, stopping the run, as we've mentioned with David, his ability to be able to do both. So that's certainly a good sign. Matt, this was excellent. This is excellent insight just for myself personally. I definitely appreciate it, but I know everybody watching and trying to learn more about David Blay as a player and also the Louisiana Tech program. I highly urge anybody wanting to find out more about Louisiana Tech football, definitely check out Matt's work at the Ruston Leader. So thanks, Matt. Your time is valuable. I appreciate you, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to help.